Hey guys, it's Cece, and today I'm here to talk a little bit about my reading process. So there are a bunch of different questions that I get asked on and off in different videos depending on when I've mentioned stuff like how I have time to read or how I annotate my books. All these kinds of questions that I thought could fit under one video. So today I'm going to be talking you through my reading process, how I choose what I read, how I make time to read, when I review, how I annotate. All of those kinds of things are going to be things covered in today's video. So yeah, I just thought this would be kind of an informative thing, plus there will be little, tidbits of tips and tricks of reading if you want to take those tips and tricks. So yeah, let's just jump in so I can talk about my reading process. Okay, so since I kind of want to talk through my process in a semi-chronological order, we're going to start with how I pick what book I'm going to read next. You may have noticed if you've watched my channel for a while that I do a fairly good job of sticking to my monthly TBRs, because I think that whenever I do my monthly TBRs, I'm good at gauging what kind of books I'm going to want to read that month, but also I pick a really wide variety of books. That way, if it hits the middle of the month and I'm like, I really don't want to read this contemporary that I picked, I'll probably have something that's fantasy or a graphic novel that I can pick up instead. But for the most part, I'm pretty good at deciding these are the books I need to get read this month, and I read them. I like being able to check off lists. It just appeals to me so deeply. And because of that, whenever I check a book off of my TBR, I get to check it off of a list, and that makes me feel really accomplished. However, if I'm reading a book on my TBR and I'm really not enjoying it, then I just set it aside. I put a bookmark in it, I move it over to the side, and I read something else. And then after I read that something else, I go back to the book I was having a hard time with, and either I finish the book or I try to read it again, figure out it's really not for me, and I DNF it. DNFing a book is really rare for me. I don't often find a book that I can't push myself through, but if I've read other books and I keep trying to go back to this and it's just not happening, then I'm gonna set the book aside. That's it, not gonna happen. So let's move on to another question I'm frequently asked, and that is, how do you even have time to read? Sometimes this is a question that I think is totally fair, and sometimes people ask me this question and they go, wow, you have so much time to read, you must have nothing else to do, which is super insulting, basically. Namely because I'm a senior in college. I have so much to do constantly, and just because I have time to read does not mean that I'm not doing 100 other things. So let me tell you what I do. Reading is basically my number 2 priority. Homework is number 1, I have to get my homework done, and then reading is in second place. I prioritize it over almost everything else in my life. Obviously, not everyone can do this, but since publishing is the career that I want to get into, reading is a really high priority. I have to be reading what's relevant, I have to be knowing what's going on in the world of reading, so yeah, it's up there because that's the career I want. Beyond that, I set aside times specifically for reading. There is an hour before I go to sleep every night, and that is for reading. That's for nothing else. It hits that time, whatever I'm doing stops, and I read for at least an hour every single day. I usually read for more than an hour, but that hour specifically is set aside for reading time. I also tend to read what interests me. There aren't a lot of books that I have to force myself to read because I'm fairly good at picking what I'm going to be interested in. But if you're looking for some advice, and I don't do this particularly well myself, but I think it's a fairly good piece of advice, is don't worry about pushing yourself to hit a certain number of books by the end of the month. I do this, and it's because I'm a booktuber and we want to have those wrap-ups with specific, fairly high wrap-up reading numbers. But if you're just trying to push yourself for numbers, you're not going to be enjoying the stuff you're reading, you're not going to enjoy the process of reading. So for the most part, I try to keep the pressure off. I try to just think about reading the books I want to read, and if I want to read 3 super long books in a month and I don't think I'm going to get that much read beyond those, then that's a thing that I accept and I move on from there. I also always carry a book with me, no matter where I am going. If I am running to the grocery store for 5 minutes, I probably have a book stuck in my bag or stuck in the car. It's always around so that whenever I have a few spare minutes and I'm not working on anything else, I can pull out the book and I can work on reading it. So whenever you're like, Cece, you must have so much time to read. No, I don't watch movies unless it's for class right now. I rarely watch TV, but if I do, it means I have some kind of time during the week set aside for that. But movies and TV are so far down the list, they don't even touch my priorities because reading is my priority. Another question I get asked a lot is, how do you read multiple books at once? And can you tell me how? No, I probably can't because I think it's a really specific thing that some people they can handle and some people they can't, and neither is better than the other. The main thing is I have to be able to do this for school. I'm an English major and usually I'm reading at least one book for a class, if not multiple books for various classes, plus I want to be reading a book that I want to be reading. So I kind of have to develop this thing where I can be reading a book for class but also be reading a book for pleasure at the same time, and if I couldn't do that then it just wouldn't work, because what about the times when I'm reading multiple books for multiple classes? It's a must for me as an English major. Although I'll be honest, when I was a kid and I was only reading for pleasure, I used to read like 5 books at a time, and I have no idea how young me used to do that. At this point, I read 2 books at a time that are for fun. I don't know what happens when I have other books that I'm reading at other times, but I'm reading 2 books that are for fun. One is a physical book that I read before bed or during the day, and the second is an ebook. My girlfriend goes to sleep earlier than I do because she has to wake up super early for work, so I have an extra hour where I still want to be awake, and that means I read an ebook in the dark. Those are my 2 books that I'm reading at once. The way I handle this is, first of all, those 2 books I tend to prefer if they are different genres. As widely different as possible, but, just so that I'm getting something different and I don't end up mixing 2 worlds because I'm reading 2 fantasy books. Weirdly, I'm offering this advice as I'm currently reading 2 fantasy books, so we'll see how that goes. But I tend to read fantasy more in physical form and contemporaries more in ebook form, so generally it's pretty easy to separate by genre. But also, one of those 2 books, the physical book, is what takes priority. That's what I'm reading during the day if I have time. That's the one that I'm going to be more invested in, so those are the stories that I'm keeping more at the surface of my brain, and that helps me to not get it mixed up with anything that might be happening in my ebook. I don't really know how to offer advice beyond that. It's just a skill that I've always had, that I've been able to read a lot of books or multiple books at once, and I've never had an issue getting storylines confused or characters confused or anything like that. And like I said, if you can't, then it doesn't mean anything. It just means that you like to focus on one book and not multiple books at once, which is totally fair because I did that for a few years also, except for school. But I would just read one book that I wanted to read at a time, and that worked just as well as reading multiple books at a time. Another question that I get asked so often is about annotating my books, so I'm gonna give you a breakdown. And actually, that's the question that inspired this video, because someone asked me to do a video about how I annotate, but that's 2 minutes of time, so I just decided to pack a bunch of questions in here. Now, I do not personally write in my books. I used to in high school because I had a class in high school where whatever book we were reading at the time, we had to take annotated notes, and our teacher would take the book, make sure we'd taken all of these complicated notes throughout the book. We got credit for it. And so for a while in high school, I was writing in my own books in pencil. This sadly means that some of my Harry Potter books have notes in them that super embarrass me, which is actually why I stopped annotating my books. It just grew to be a preference for me that I felt like I wasn't getting that much out of writing my thoughts at the time into my books, and so I stopped doing it. However, I did jump on a color-coded flag train. A color-coded flag train, you ask? Well, let me explain. So these are the flags I use. I get them from Staples. I have to buy them every couple of months or so because I don't know. I buy them every couple of months or so, but they're from Staples. These are the colors that are on there, and yeah. Each color has a specific meaning. That's how they end up in the books. So, to go over my meanings, if a book gets a blue flag, it means I've gotten emotional about that scene. Whether that means I actually cried or I just got teared up, then that scene gets a blue flag. Yellow and green are interchangeable. Basically, it just means that there's a quote I really like, or a moment that I thought was poignant, or that I might want to think about. Just, in general, they're kind of all of the moments in a book that I really appreciate but don't have any other specific meaning. It's just quotes that I enjoy. Orange is if a book makes me laugh or makes me giggle or makes me smile, then it gets an orange flag. And then pink is for romance. So if there's a really cute interaction between 2 people that I definitely think are gonna get together, then they get a pink flag. If it's a cute relationship moment between people who are already together, they get a pink flag. Anything super cute and shippy, pink. So those are what my colorful flags mean. There are 5 of them, and I'm going to show you a couple of books that I have fairly marked up. So Shadow Shaper has a few flags going up and down its length. There are just a couple of general quotes I like and also a couple of funny moments. My Darker Shade of Magic books are fairly marked up too as far as post-it notes go. lots of laughs and lots of quotes I adore because I think Victoria Schwab's writing is gorgeous, and so I constantly find myself marking moments that I think are really well written. Plus, in the second book especially, there were a couple of times that finally got marked pink because there was a ship I was finally super behind. The Hate U Give has a few different flags because I think the writing has a lot to offer, so there are a ton of orange flags because Star as a main character is really funny and her narration is funny, but also lots of green and yellow because it had a lot of really great things to say. And then of course, how could I get through this book without at least a couple of blue flags? Those are like 3 moments that I was actively crying, so that just gives you like a scale for what the book was like. And last up we have We Are the Ants, which is, if not the most marked up, the book that I have that has all 5 colors, which happens fairly infrequently. But it's covered in orange because it's funny, it's covered in yellow and green because I think it's really well written, blue because I sobbed plenty, and of course plenty of pink because I thought the ship in this was adorable and I loved it. So that's just kind of what my books end up looking like if I really enjoy them. They get lots and lots of sticky tabs. Now what the tabs offer to me is, first of all, if I've forgotten some of a book, I can pull a book out and look at it and think about how well rounded it was, what it offered, what kind of book it was, if it was more funny, if it was more about just like great writing, if it was emotional. It lets me know if the story was well rounded and had a lot of everything to offer. This is also a thing I do when I read on my Kindle. There are only 4 colors, but that's because there's not a yellow and a green that I can just use both of them on. And if I read something on my Kindle and then wind up getting it in a physical copy, then I go through and I transfer my little color-coded notes to the physical book. That's just how I personally do it. I know some people get a lot out of writing in their books, which I totally support. I think that if that's how you read and that's how you remember what you were thinking at the time, then that's great for you, but it just doesn't quite work for me. And since I started doing these sticky tabs back when I first started BookTube, it's been a really good way for me to keep track of what I like, and I really recommend it as a method. And now finally, I'm going to talk about when I write reviews, what happens when I finish a book, the end of the process. So when I finish a book, I tend to have a pretty good idea of what the rating is going to be. I've been reading it, scaling it as I go along through reading it. I talk to my girlfriend constantly when I'm reading books, and she's always asking for updates, where my head is at. So by the time I come to the end of the book, I have a pretty good idea of what I'm going to rate it. Sometimes if I'm really unsure, if I'm stuck between like a 0.5 or just a round number, then I let it sit overnight and I rate it the next day. However, if the book had elements like a main character who had a marginalized identity I don't share, then when I finish the book, I look up Own Voices reviews so that I can learn more about how that identity was represented. I just want to make sure that I'm reading from the people the book is trying to represent to see how they felt about the representation. If there are things that I, because I don't share that marginalization, didn't notice as I was reading it. If you read books that are about characters who have a marginalized identity that you do not share, read Own Voices reviews. This is not me giving advice. This is me telling you. If you are not trans and you read a book about a trans character, find reviews by trans reviewers, okay? I tend to only write like a long form review if it is an ebook that I've received from NetGalley or Edelweiss, because those websites, after you finish a book, they ask for a review, so I write one. I also write a long form review if the book is from an independent publisher or if it's self-published, because then I cross-post to Amazon. Authors get so much more support once their books hit 50 reviews, so if I read a book and it doesn't have 50 reviews yet on Amazon, I 100% go and I write a review, and that is another thing that I recommend you do. Cross-post your reviews to other websites. It is incredibly helpful to authors, especially those who are independent or self-published, or it's just a book that's not getting a lot of attention yet, so highly recommend that you do that. And then this is the first year that I've really had a method for when I film reviews. It used to just be when I was sent a book, then I would do a video review, or if I realized I hadn't done a review yet that month, I'd just choose a book and review it. But this year I am reviewing basically just 2017 releases. My goal has been to read at least one 2017 release every single month, so whatever book I chose for that, that is a book that is definitely going to be reviewed on my channel. And then if I get an extra book for review and I want to do a whole video talking about it, then I'll do more than one review a month. Also, if I receive a book for review like I did for Shadow Shaper, I take notes in the front. So I tend to put post-it notes at the front of whatever review book I'm reading so I can take notes throughout, and that way I can go back to those notes when I'm filming a video review or when I'm writing a long-form review. It's just useful to take notes as I'm going so I don't forget anything. And finally, the last part of the process is finishing a book. What do I do when I finish a book? I close the cover, I go, that was good, that was really good, that was terrible, that was fine, whatever my decision is, and then I put that book on my shelf and immediately start another book. It's just this process that I've had basically my entire life because I've been reading since I was really young. When I finish one book, I start directly into another. Even if I only get to one page that night before it's time to go to sleep, I start a new book because I'm just always constantly looking for more stories, and I'm so excited that I finished one because maybe it was fabulous and now I get to discover if the next one's fabulous. So yeah, I think that's everything that I wanted to say about my reading process. I think I've answered all of the questions that I've kind of amassed over a large collection of videos. If you have other questions about my reading process, leave them in the comments below and I would love to answer them. But this is basically how it goes for me. How does the reading process go for you? Do you do things differently than I do? Let me know those things in the comments below too. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed, and I will see you in another video very soon. Bye!